So I've been seeing a lot of videos on YouTube about I quit teaching or why I quit teaching, and people giving a long list of reasons why they left the profession. I could do that and the video would be about an hour long, but I see no need in complaining or crying or looking back and just being negative. I thought I would just, my version of this, I would just try to put out or try to suggest solutions, positive steps that goes into maybe somewhat salvaging the profession. So I'm going to start with short-term solutions. Short-term. Number one, and this is aimed at any administrator who might be watching this video. If you want some advice from somebody who's a 22-year veteran who left the profession. First step, that 2 weeks before work starts, especially for the new people, they have that added week before the school year starts, where you put people in a library or cafeteria 8 hours a day, every day. You need to stop doing that entirely. You need to condense and get down to what just what is important. Only the important stuff. It needs to be in a video format, and it needs to be stuff that they can do. Maybe knock it out 1 hour a day or in the afternoon, but the remainder of that time, all of that time, needs to be for them getting ready for a very anxious day, many of them for the first time, and they can't get ready if they're sitting in a meeting, and that's just an anxiety builder. That's number one. Number two, all of the Messiah talks, the Savior talks about how you're going to save lives and turn lives around, and you're the key ingredient and all that. Nobody can live up to that. That's an anxiety builder. That's a depression builder. That's an I quit builder. You stop doing that. That's number two. Number three, short term. The faculty meetings where you get the faculty in and you passively aggressively rake the entire campus over the coals for CBA scores or for last year's test scores, or for a spike in any type of widespread misbehavior in students. You need to stop that as well. Those meetings need to end. That's going to get people ran off, especially your one-on-ones for your core teachers. When you call them in, especially the younger ones, the younger they get, the more likely that's going to be the tipping point where somebody quits. So that's next. Here's short-term solution number 4. If you're all willing to burn a teacher when a kid does something, or burn a teacher when there's high failures, you also need to equally encourage the teacher when things are going well, specifically personally, and you need to know when these things are happening. Now, I could probably think of some more short-term solutions, but those are the ones that stick out the most. Okay, so now moving on to long-term solutions. And this is where it starts to get more philosophical. And this is where you need to realize that there's nothing. This is just mainly for administrators and people in places of authority. First thing you need to realize is that the teacher is not the number one factor in the education of a child. That is a myth that I heard for as long as I was in education training as a teacher. Countless trainings, books, speakers, what have you. That was 30 years perpetuating a myth that is crushing the profession, crushing it. And it's mainly from a cultural standpoint. The problem with our education system is not a government, it's not methodology, it's not this administrator does something a certain way versus this one not doing it a certain way. It's effective. It's none of those things. It is a cultural issue. We live in a society that does not value knowledge for the sake of knowledge, and it does not value school, and it does not value all of the resources and facilities that we have. It doesn't value it, none of it. That is the key ingredient in teacher burnout, teachers leaving, and the overall problem with kids not learning. It's kids and families not valuing learning in the first place. If you can have that, if you can work that into your mindset, then what happens is you become more sympathetic with your teachers, and things will improve with how you treat teachers, and maybe some retention. Now, the second thing, long term, and this is a core root fundamental problem, as long as average daily attendance is tied to school funding, schools are never going to improve. When you tie the funding of a school to average daily attendance, what you've essentially done is you've created a gigantic daycare center with some pretentious goings-ons and proclamations and such. But essentially, at its core, schools are daycare centers, because all they're really worried about is daily attendance. All parents are worried about is babysitting, which ultimately is all the school is worried about. So what you need to do is there needs to be a restructuring of the system where average daily attendance does not decide whether or not somebody keeps their job or whether or not a campus stays open. And that's going to open the door or require things to be a lot more expensive than they are. So part of this is, and this is a key part of changing this paradigm and how schools are funded and how things are approached, is truancy does not need to be outlawed. If a kid does not want to be at school, a kid should not have to be at school. Students need to, if they're there, it's because they want to be there. Next thing, this is kind of a system shift, number 3. Education should not be seen as a human right or as something that is guaranteed. In other words, if there's some level of due process, it can be taken from you. You can be permanently expelled from school from receiving a public education. That needs to happen. A system needs to be arranged where that right can be revoked. Because bad behavior is absolutely smothering schools. Which leads me to my next solution. This one's a little more easy to implement and visualize. There's a massive power imbalance in schools. Kids and parents hold all the power, especially if they know how to pick up the phone or do emails or show up to school board meetings or what have you. So they hold all the cards. So what that creates is a massive power imbalance, because teachers do not have advocates. They don't. When a situation happens in a classroom, no matter what it is, teachers are not the first one they think about, and they have no choice in what happens to that kid or to their room. So my solution to this is that the teacher's classroom is their kingdom. It is their territory. They should have the ultimate right of who is in their room and when they're in their room. And whatever logistical issues or financial issues that causes somebody else, that shouldn't matter. The onus has to be on administration to truly support the teacher. The teacher needs to be in control of their room. And I've seen it in my own career. I've seen it countless careers that have been ended, destroyed, ruined by one kid. It can be just one kid that completely destroys an otherwise really productive, well-oiled, supportive, well-designed, well-laid out classroom learning environment. It can be completely ruined by one student. And honestly, an entire career can be wiped out by one student. So that is a tremendous unjust power imbalance that needs to be eliminated. The next one, the next, and notice I've waited a while. Notice money hasn't come up anywhere in my discussion of this. Money hasn't come up anywhere. But I'm going to go ahead and wedge this in here. Money, let's say I would say $20,000 to $30,000 annually needs to be added to any given teacher salary. That's the start. The second thing you need to do, especially on secondary campuses, is campuses need to have a commissary. 5 days a week. You need to have, you need to serve breakfast and lunch and snacks and coffee. There needs to be a commissary. I'm not talking about chips and finger foods and garbage. I'm talking about well-prepared, well-balanced meals where teachers can be healthy. Which leads to another expense that the districts need to spring for, and that's healthcare. Each district needs to have a doctor and a PA and a nurse, where teachers can get physical treatment, they can get mental health treatment. A lot of teachers are rolling highly stressed out and unhealthy. Since I've quit teaching, my health has improved by leaps and bounds. So healthcare needs to be a part of it. And I dare to say a wellness center where they can work out, where they can run, maybe where they can bring their kids, where they can sort of try to adopt some kind of healthy lifestyle where they don't have to depend on antidepressant medication and alcohol and cigarettes and, just grinding through an unhealthy depression and anxiety-racked life. So pay attention to, there needs to be more attention and expense on teachers' health. The next thing is if the teacher has a situation with a student, the students always have the quote, air quotes, safe space. Same needs to be provided for a teacher. They need to have a safe space. Not only that, teacher needs to be able to say, you know what, I've had enough for the day. I think I'm going to go home. And then I may not be back for a day or two or three. They need to be able to unplug and leave when they need to for their own mental health, which leads to another requirement is that some level of respect and funding and support needs to be provided for substitutes, so that teachers, you'll actually have substitutes, so teachers will be able to do this. Okay, so now I want to move on to some more structural things. First thing, especially in urban districts and cities, we all have to realize that schools are way too big, especially your high schools. And this is completely unhealthy for students. It's unhealthy for teachers. You're creating, when you have a high school that has 2,000 to 3,000 students in it or more, what you're creating is a mental health disaster. And so what you need to do, the common consciousness needs to be raised, that indeed the mental health of students and teachers is worth spending much more money to reduce the size of campuses, where teachers actually know who the kids are, the kids know who each other is, and the kids know who teachers are. Because it's your big anonymous entity when you go to any given urban high school anywhere in the country. It's a disaster. It's a failure, and it needs to be recognized as such. Okay, so that brings me to the next point about mental health, physical health. What we also need to realize is that the school day is too long. And that kind of goes back to my point about babysitting and schools being a daycare primarily. If you're concerned about learning, and learning is the number one priority, you need to understand that there's a lot of downtime in schools, which is where a lot of the bad behavior originates. People don't like, and we're not evolved or created to sit in rows for hours on end. Teachers they're human beings. They're not designed to be in a room, stuck in one room for 8 hours, where you can't go to the bathroom, you can't take a break, where you're responsible every minute of every day for something, especially like 30 kids. So the day is too long. You need to knock a couple of hours out of each day, which leads me to the next thing is the school week is too long. Fridays, doesn't need to be any kids anywhere around. That day is for planning. That day is for content creation. That day is for curriculum. That day is for collaboration. One thing that educators and educational, like administration and politicians, have never really recognized is that there isn't a lot of compensated time in a teacher's life where they can just sit and plan, make phone calls, do grades, etc. That's all this unspoken understanding that teachers are going to do all of this at home, or they're going to stay late at night, which is a burnout builder. So no, the day is too long for kids' attention and kids' engagement. And then the week is too long for kids' engagement and kids' attention, and teachers need time at the end of each week to regroup, to plan, and to do the things that we always talk about, and it's always been talked about, but has never really been done in schools, which is a reason for school failure and for teacher burnout. All right. Now, next thing, and this is radical, and this goes back to, this is connected to my comment, cultural condemnation of the country, of people not really caring about education. If they did, then school would be for school, and this is done in Europe, specifically I believe in Germany. There are no school extracurricular activities. School is for school, and that's the way it needs to be here. Any type of extracurriculars, that needs to be club activities, and honestly it needs to be privately funded. Doesn't need to be funded by the taxpayer. We don't need to have campuses, and I'm not condemning coaches, because there are coaches that are good teachers. It's just the principle of having 30 to 60% of your faculty primarily being coaches for team sports. That's got to stop. That really deconstructs campuses and high schools as actually being academic entities. It's more babysitting entities that has an athletic association. Is what a lot of places have turned into. Okay, now a final point, and this is for everybody. You need to stop listening to the media about education. You need to stop. And that's not only liberal media, that's also conservative media. They have no idea what they're talking about. And part of that, when you put all that aside, the next thing you need to do is you need to really seriously question your own perception of what happens in schools, because you have no idea. Most of the time, people have attitudes and opinions about schools because A, they went to school at some point, and B, they have kids in school. So automatically they think they have some kind of working knowledge about what's going on. I guarantee you that you do not. If you've never worked in a school for any length of time where your livelihood was dependent on it, you have a skewed vision of reality. So you need to listen to people that have been in schools, like myself, and like current teachers. So, again, I hope that I've given everybody something to think about. I hope these are solutions that, in some small way I've moved the needle for somebody, that's in some kind of position that can move the needle in a positive way. So, hope everybody's doing well, and I hope you learned something.